Well, we had the plaster taken off, and then we went round to the X-ray department and had an X-ray taken, with her still in just the sort of bottom part of the plaster, and then we were seen up on the ward by our consultant, who was really happy with what the X-ray showed, but she still hadn't yet been taken completely out of the plaster, and we were still very apprehensive about how she was going to react to it all. So what sort of happened was, after the X-ray was seen, that was the nurses suggested that we unbandage the last part of the plaster that she was left in, and then sort of once she got used to that we would gently lift her out and give her a bath on the ward. It was just so strange, her being without the plaster. She was so much lighter, and she was really apprehensive about us holding her because we was nervous, and the nursing staff were keen for us to actually handle her rather than I think from the point of view that she was quite a big child, and it was a lot for one nursing staff to hold. So we were encouraged to really pick her up and take her through to give her a bath ourselves, and that was quite nerve-wracking because we were nervous and she could pick up on the fact that we were nervous. And we sat her in this bath, and the thing that was most difficult was she just could not grasp the fact that she could sit up again, and she was sort of lying back in the bath and she was sliding about all over the place, and she just couldn't sit up, and part of that was because obviously the position she'd been in plaster, and her legs were quite stiff, and rather than sort of her muscles being weak, they were just very stiff initially when she came out, and that was something that we weren't quite expecting. Thankfully, we were able to go home from the hospital the same night, and again it was just odd putting her in the car because she hadn't realised that she could sit up, so we still had to sort of prop her back at the angle that she'd been used to in plaster, and at night again we had to sleep with a pillow under her so that she was propped up in a way that she'd been used to in plaster. And that went on really probably for a good few days, maybe. I'm trying to think back now because it's been a couple of months, but it might have been as long as a sort of week that we just had to position her in that way when she was asleep to make sure she was comfortable. But I think what I found most difficult was sort of how quickly things were going to happen after she came out of plaster. I, for some reason, was under the impression that she was going to walk very quickly and get back on her feet, and it took a lot longer than I'd expected. And in some ways no one can prepare you for that because every child must be different. But it was frustrating, and in a funny sort of way I actually found that bit more difficult to cope with than her being in plaster, because nobody could tell me what was going to happen or when it was going to happen. It was this case that everything was just going to happen in its own time. But Bethan was fantastic in how she did her own physiotherapy, and we had to sort of come up with inventive ways to try and encourage her to get back on her feet. So we played lots of games. I mean, we spent ages pretending to be different types of animals and getting her up on her knees and crawling around. So she was, elephants and crocodiles and tigers and lions, and we used to race each other around the mat, me pretending to be the cat and she was the little mouse running away from me, just to get her going again and crawling round, because that was the first stage. And then I think it was probably about a week after she worked out that she could pull herself up onto the sofa and stand up, and she was desperate to do things for herself, but you could just see that her legs started shaking. She'd sort of be stood there and suddenly her legs would sort of turn to jelly and be shaking, and she'd look, "Mum, look, I'm standing." And it was so lovely to watch, and she was doing it all herself because she was determined, and she really surprised us because I think because once she realised that she could do certain things, she was then keen to try it again and again. So I remember the first time that she sort of went up and down stairs. It was quite a sort of an occasion, but it was really her doing it that she gave herself the confidence, and we just needed to be there just to watch out for her. But it took some encouragement on both our halves, and we were petrified of her falling down. I was petrified when she was coming downstairs that she'd fall downstairs and do herself a major injury. So we were cautious on one front, but on the other hand, we're desperate for her to find her feet again for her sake and for our sake. So it was coming up with that balance, really. There were a few occasions where she woke up in the morning and suddenly, for what seemed like no reason, was complaining that her legs were hurting. And one morning she just absolutely flatly refused to stand. And that was really difficult, that was, because I sort of went into panic mode, like, what she'd done. I was trying to think, did she hurt herself at all? And there was absolutely nothing the last couple of days that I could think of, except for the fact that she'd been crawling around on her hands and knees on a tiled floor. And I thought my sort of sensible side was saying she must have just bruised her knees, it'll be just something trivial. But it really was sort of panic mode. Has she had a fracture? Should we be taking her to the hospital? Should I be phoning somebody? And everything within 24 hours was fine. But it was a worry. And, it was that panic of, have we missed something? Has she done something? And you hear of people, of children managing to have these accidents, and what seems like a very trivial thing, and that they can fracture so easily after. And the doctor had told us to be wary for the first sort of 6 to 8 weeks after she came out of plaster, and this sort of happened about 4 or 5 weeks after she came out. So, in our mind, she was within that time scale. So, but thankfully, everything turned out all right. Oh, well, we were actually told, because of the age that Bethan is, that they're sort of too young, really, to cooperate with doing any formal physiotherapy. So one of the things that the doctors suggested was that we take her swimming. And the reason they suggest that is obviously because you're able to do a lot more in the water than you are on dry land. So, and it was great because actually taking her swimming gave her the confidence that she could put her weight through her legs. And the other thing that we were able to do when she was swimming, which she was struggling to do on dry land, was that she had, her hip was held a little bit in flexion. So it's sort of held up close to her body because that was the position she was used to. And she was having difficulty straightening out and pushing it back to stand straight. And that was part of what was stopping her from actually standing up and walking again. And taking her swimming gave her the confidence that she could straighten up. And she was just able to do a lot more. She was able to kick her legs, and she actually walked in the pool before she walked on dry land because it was so much easier. So we have to be honest, we took her sort of a couple of times a week for the first few weeks, and then it sort of fizzled out a bit because she's been doing so well. But it certainly gave her the confidence that she was struggling on dry land. And both of us went swimming with, well, I didn't go in the pool, but I was there as an extra pair of hands just from a practical purposes because she couldn't sort of stand and put up on a swimming costume or get herself dried. So an extra pair of hands was useful there in the pool. Another thing just to mention, when she came out of plaster, was sort of seeing her skin for the first time, and I was a little bit apprehensive about whether she'd have any sort of funny sensations after being in the plaster. And she was a little bit funny about us touching her scar when she came out. At first, we just wondered if she had a bit of sort of extra sensitivity around that area. And she just seemed to, if we made a point of sort of touching that, she'd get quite upset with us, and say, oh no, it hurts, you mustn't touch it. But if you distracted her and in the bath, and she was fine. So it was obviously just something that if we drew too much attention to it, she was a little bit sensitive. But there obviously wasn't an issue, but it was just one of those things that we didn't pay too much attention to it or draw attention to it, because I think otherwise she might have started having oh, you mustn't touch that sort of thing. And to be honest, she's been very proud about showing everybody her war wounds, so she's quite happy with it now, and it's not an issue. But just initially we just wondered if there was a bit of extra sensitivity around that area.